The state is a legitimate concept. Government of some form is necessary. What should we want from our state? Should it be a protector of rights and freedoms? Surely it should be. Should it seek to establish an equality of opportunity and equality before the law for all of its citizens? It surely should. Where a state falls short of moral decency in word or deed, it must be challenged. Where a government actively oppresses its people, treating them as mere subjects rather than free citizens, it must be removed and replaced by a government dedicated to social justice and the moral improvement of humankind. Where the absence of a state causes injustice and exploitation to flourish, a political community has to be founded so that it may act to raise the people up and fly the flag of democracy. The absence of a world state is not something the people should have to tolerate. In order to unite humankind, a new political community representing the people of the world, rather than national interests or international banks or multinational corporations, is a noble cause we seek to establish. There are many strategies which can be employed in the service of this goal, but as we struggle, we must remain loyal to the truth and dedicated to peace. When we speak of social class, we should understand we are dealing with subjectively defined concepts. Marx's conception of class is somewhat limited by today's standards, as one would expect. In the modern world, there is considerably more to the current hierarchies to which we are subject than people's relationship to the means of production. We are subjected to layers of injustice. A classless society is quite impossible. We are, as a species, bound to carve out, again and again, different types of hierarchies. One hierarchy can be toppled and replaced by a fresh system of dominance. Perhaps then this system can be eroded over time and made less rigid, allowing for greater freedoms and a more civilized path to be forged. We are in competition with each other for limited opportunities and resources. Man, in the basic sense, is a selfish creature. However, it's obvious people are not purely motivated by greed and ruthless self-interest. Decency, kindness, and generosity are clearly higher moral standards, and humans do reach this higher ground when we cooperate with each other for mutual benefit. What is clear to many today is that multinational corporations and rampant capitalism are not only destroying the environment, but also tearing cultures and communities asunder. Hyperconsumption is a threat to the species and many other life forms on our planet. The madness must be stopped. How can this be done? We should put people before profits. We should put communities before the obsessive desire to create obscene riches. We have to put democracy at the centre of villages, towns and cities around the world. We should put democracy in the boardrooms and in the factories. We should promote local autonomy in the economic sense, the world over, so as to liberate communities from overbearing corporations. A great restructuring is needed. The case for massive redistribution of wealth is a fairly simple one. That we live in a world where a tiny few live in obscene wealth at the expense of enormous numbers of men, women and children is completely unjustifiable. No reasonable person should be expected to tolerate this. A system which actively encourages avarice while displaying contempt for the importance, beauty and dignity of the human person is vile, and we should surely be moved to dismantle it and replace it with a new enlightened order. Waste and overindulgence are huge problems in the modern world. Individuals have to try and live within their means. Governments must do the same. Self-discipline and willpower are, of course, key elements to walking a stable and sustainable life path. The state and community leaders should play their part in promoting and supporting sustainable institutions and standards. It is an unfortunate reality that societies have been conditioned to be wasteful and dangerously extravagant for a long time. That this has been toxic and destructive cannot be denied. The plain truth is, we simply have to change our ways. A massive shift towards stable and sustainable living in one or two countries will not be sufficient. Humanity must change its ways. A world state, using the collective resources of our species and our planet, can aid this great change. Militarism is clearly still a threat to peace and democracy throughout the world. When militaristic ideals are mixed in with conceptions of cultural, national, or racial superiority, we have a recipe for war and tyranny, as history has shown us. As we've seen time and again, military regimes or governments dominated by military figures tend to lapse into idolatry, corruption, and cronyism. Such regimes have been known to commit human rights violations as routinely as their economic failings. In Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, military figures have crushed democracies and wrongfully assumed power for themselves. The manner in which many usurpers govern tends to follow a nasty pattern. In countries where the military has traditionally acted in a constitutional role, we still see problems caused by militarism. Oftentimes, countries overspend on defence to the detriment of other essential areas of society. Oftentimes, people who offer up reasonable criticism of the military are shouted down or labelled unfairly by reactionaries. Military personnel always have to be sold as heroic defenders of justice and freedom to the public. Praise must be heaped upon the men and women in green uniforms. They must be held up as courageous and virtuous in this way or that. To do less could seriously do damage to the system itself. It is, of course, true that many heroic and tremendous people do serve in the armed forces of countries around the world, but it's also true that many acts of brutality, cowardice, and cruelty are carried out by soldiers. There are those who would use their positions of power to violate the weak and the defenseless. Nations have a right to self-defense as individual citizens do, but it's not an enlightened position to be glorifying the military or applauding from the sidelines as large nations bully smaller ones. Pride, honour, and brotherhood will be words ringing in the ears of those who serve or who have served their countries in the military. These words are also used to condition the general public to think and feel in certain ways about their military. But we would do well not to take for granted the idea that men and women in green uniforms are the defenders of freedom and democracy. The manner in which armies and navies are structured and organised around the world is actually in opposition to free society. Let's be aware of the fact that many combat veterans fall into poverty and homelessness after serving their country. Much of the time, ex-servicemen and women are not given the tools they need to make a success of civilian life. And of course, many veterans suffer from combat-related disorders, which are often mistreated or disregarded. It's a sad truth that in many parts of the world, the institution of the military itself is worshipped with an almost religious fervour, while at the same time people are kicked to the streets with a cold disregard for their well-being? What sits behind the idea or ideal of war? Is it not righteous mass organised violence? No national government can sell it using this word formulation, though, as it wouldn't go over very well with the public. We are a tribal species, to be sure. The dangers of a tribal mentality and its relationship to war are well established. If we always see the outsider as a threat to our ways, if we are not welcoming to foreigners or immigrants but are instead hostile, if we are constantly othering our fellow humans, we are creating an environment ripe for suspicion and potential conflict. It is a sad fact of reality that there is a time and a place for violence to be used as a last resort, legitimate tool of self-defense. Pretentious people will make it their business to tell you what is and isn't art. Some speak of a need to return to nature as they denounce the banal modern world. Others will call on us to embrace industrial society and leave the past where it is. Others still may speak of the inseparable barrier between life and art. We say, do not take the words of the ostentatious and the pompous to heart. Art is self-discovery. You do not have to appeal in art to any particular style or worldview, or limit yourself to any one medium. You are the creator. Art is what you say it is. A critic can label art as bad. He can call something foul and cry that it doesn't belong in an exhibition. You can be called out, but you can always respond by saying that any crafted work is art, and no one is truly qualified to say whether art is good or bad. Art doesn't have to be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be a labour of love. Can a criminal be an artist? Of course. Theft can be artistic. Murder can be artistic. Art can be vile and disgusting. Virtue and craftsmanship will not necessarily go hand in hand. There is no true divide between life and art. There is no divide between art and nature. Nature is everything. Unnatural is a false idea. Art is for everyone, except when it isn't. You are not obliged to embrace that which you despise. Art does not owe you anything, except when it does. Your creations will not save the world. You are not the saviour. Art does not have to be a noble pursuit. Racist art is still art. Homophobic art is still art. Beware of those who say they wish to purge society by destroying so-called inferior art forms. The universe doesn't need you to create. Art doesn't need you. No work of art can ever be as satisfying as a good bowel movement. Do not become overly concerned with your creative identity. Do not overthink your craft. Selfish is the act of creation. Logic is not the enemy of the artist. There is no tyranny of reason, except when there is. Creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. Your art is not safe from that of your brothers and sisters. There is no inherent meaning of life, but this does not mean life is without meaning or purpose. Life is rich with purpose. You make meaning and purpose. Countless people have been slaughtered in the name of God, or have been killed in the name of some political cause. Many have died in the name of progress. Was it all worth it? How could we even begin to answer such a question? Maybe it's the wrong question. Perhaps the question should be, how do we make significant changes in the present so as to ensure that the terrible crimes of the past are never revisited? Some people talk about love and hate as being simple and fundamental, but is love not fairly complex? Is it one thing, or is it a variety of mental states and feelings interacting? Of course, hatred comes in different forms. There is a difference between that blind hatred that some will feel towards those they view as deadly enemies, and a hatred that can grow or rise slowly out of feelings of contempt. Fear is more fundamental than love or hate, or happiness or trust or pride or shame. Fear is at the base of the tree. It's there at the beginning. It stays with you all your days. It is likely to be there at the end. It is a lifelong companion. One does not have to view this as a grim truth. Hope can and does act as a necessary counterbalance to fear on the journey of life. The fear of death can be alleviated with an appropriate outlook, which recognizes that we are not forever and that change is inevitable. To view fear as being an exclusively negative force is wrong. Many times in life, we will find there is very good reason to be afraid. The world can obviously be very dangerous and brutal. Without that internal alarm bell, you would not have made it this far. If you lost it today, you wouldn't make it much further. Of course, a person can become consumed or lost in fear. For some, there will be no escape. For others, they will be able to use their reasoning faculties to lift their heads above the dark waters. We all have desires. We all have a need. We all have to learn necessary skills to satisfy our desires, our needs. If you want something, you need to know how to get it. And so one needs to learn how to read emotional states. People will learn from an early age as they socialize and interact that it's not so hard to get a desire-driven person to do what they want. One can make an attractive offer or paint a pretty picture to carve open an advantageous situation. Words and deeds can be powerful tools. Maybe it's true to say that a person who wears their heart on their sleeve is probably going to be easier to manipulate than someone who plays their cards close to their chest. One must learn to be aware of others' intentions and understand that people will seek to control each other's emotional states through manipulation. There are more than a few unscrupulous types, professional and highly skilled manipulators, who make their living off of the back of others' fears and desires. Some individuals lack a conscience, and they will play other people like violins, always to their own ends. One has to be wise to such people in the social jungle. Manipulation isn't necessarily unethical, but it can be. One can be a morally sound manipulator. One can be an immoral manipulator. Manipulate isn't necessarily a dirty word. The more you know about what makes people tick, the better equipped you are to avoid certain pitfalls, and the more likely you will be to prosper in public and private. We should enjoy philosophical questions and not be intimidated by the subject. Philosophy is for everyone. Asking questions and having a thirst for knowledge are essential to personal growth as you journey through life. Why is there something instead of nothing? why shouldn't there be something instead of nothing? Is what appears to us actually real? Can we truly trust our senses? Can we truly know that anything exists outside of ourselves? Do we have free will? Or is a hard, deterministic outlook correct? Is free will a superstition? Does God exist? If God does exist, what is the nature or character of God? Is there life after death? Do people have souls that transcend physical death? Can we really experience anything objectively? What is the best moral system? Could such a system exist if we believe that morality is subjective? Or do you believe that there is an absolute moral standard? What are numbers? Are they the conceptions of humans, or are they inherent features of the universe? One should take the time to study ontology and contemplate one's place in all the magnificence of nature. The best questions generate more questions. Where does wisdom lie in matters of sexual morality? Surely we have to accept that everyone is unique, and we are all on our own personal paths of discovery. We should further accept that repression of our natural desires is unhealthy. And we must always remember that love is always natural. A person cannot be sure that everyone around them will accept them as they are. There are many small-minded people in the world, sadly. But you must accept yourself for your own mental well-being. The state should respect consenting adults' right to a private sexual life, so long as they are acting within the law. A civilized people is a respectful and tolerant people. However, the state has a duty to act against those who would prey on the innocent and the defenseless. The state must target predators and condemn relations which demonstrably damage human beings. No one should be forced to conform to a rigid or traditional sexual standard, but those who choose to lead traditional lifestyles should be respected. Those who hold to different standards should be respected as long as they respect the law. We should not waste our time sitting in judgment of each other. Men and women should have reproductive choice for a simple reason. The individual should be free to follow their own conscience. This is the standard of an enlightened people. To break the chains of addiction, we must first realize that we are addicts. We must realize that no slave can live a truly fulfilling life. Then, we have to commit to breaking with the past. When we have made this commitment, we then will have to come to terms with the struggle. Life is struggle. We have to recognize our triggers and learn how to manage our lives in such a way that is beneficial to ourselves and the community. Addiction can, of course, be a painful and miserable state, but you can overcome. Both self-discipline and social support are essential. We should be on our guard against those who would rally against the intellectual or the genuine expert. The motivations for attacking such people can often times be less than virtuous. For the edificationist, those who call for a return to an imagined past, those who promote a cruel and warped conception of masculinity, those who call for rigid gender roles, and those who would like to enforce brutal hierarchies based on race or the supposed biological or cultural superiority/inferiority of human beings, are those who have to be confronted and defeated. A world of greater equality, where the moral worth of each individual is respected, where a man or woman is free to forge their own path, liberated from the shackles of regressive attitudes, is the goal and desire of the modern thinker and activist. As individuals and as communities, we should be on our guard against moral entrepreneurs. Moral panics can often be difficult to manage because the matter at its centre is taboo. But we must overcome our biases and preconceptions if we are to progress. We should recognise that mainstream media has long operated as agents of moral indignation. Crusading and muckraking is clearly popular in some circles, but even simply reporting the facts can cause panic and anxiety. We would do well to remember, though, that not all perceived threats to the social order are actual threats. In truth, it often benefits those in positions of power, where the population at large are distracted away from corruption and incompetence in high places. This should not be hard to understand. Folk devils can be very useful, as can a media machine skilled in sensationalizing events. Scapegoats are consistently woven into narratives designed to scare or divide the masses. Mainstream media has become increasingly skilled at conditioning consumers in such a way that the punishments called for by editors and writers will be greeted with great enthusiasm. Irresponsible media tends to inhibit rational discussion and debate about the social issue on the table. Where we have a group of people being vilified or even demonized by the influential, there is a danger that a significant number of folks aren't thinking for themselves. If you are consuming the narrative of the moral entrepreneurs without being skeptical of the claims you hear, then you may well be in danger to yourself and others. If you allow others to do your thinking for you, then you are not a free person. You belong to someone else. Society should allow for a plurality of ideas to exist or compete in the public arena. Ideas will be accepted or rejected in a free marketplace when scrutinized or examined, or will they? Human behavior does not always conform to philosophical conceptions, and much of the time we are not really playing on an even field. There are problems with the idea of a free marketplace of ideas. We should recognize the subjective nature of so-called good and bad ideas. We must further recognize that people are not completely rational beings. We can be biased and prejudicial. Our emotions can get the better of us sometimes, and in many cases people don't have the level of education necessary to comprehend the subject matter they are being presented with. Having a free marketplace of ideas isn't the only way to discover the truth, but it does serve a valuable purpose. It may be a flawed idea, but where would we be if an open forum for discussion, debate and exchange didn't exist? If such a thing were not permitted, we would have to have a restraining power in place, would we not? Such a power might lead us to a place where we have accepted creeds. With accepted creeds comes the toxic notion of heresy. We have, of course, seen all this before, and still today authoritarian regimes keep populations under the heel of ruling elites by denying free speech and expression. It should be clear that there is a great benefit to having a place where ideas can be challenged and assessed, giving people the opportunity to see and hear the beliefs, values or theories of their fellows. Perhaps the analogy with so-called free market economics isn't a particularly good one. Comparisons of this kind are limited, to say the least. The truth will not in every case emerge from a discussion or a debate. Skilled liars walk among us. They are able to pass off many falsehoods as facts, making the audience feel like they have been enlightened. So, for those of us who are interested in seeing the truth triumph, we need to understand that how we present our arguments matters very much. We can say that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own facts. It's up to you, using your reasoning faculty, to decide for yourself what constitutes a good or bad idea. Unfortunately, there are many who will lower the standard of public discourse, much of the time for their own ends. For the greater good of freedom, we have to tolerate this. This doesn't mean we have to accept ridiculous or aggressive ideas. We simply have to recognize that everyone should have the same basic level of freedom. It's not too much to ask that we respect each other's basic right to free speech and free expression. When we address the subject of political correctness, let us first accept that the term cultural Marxism is a nonsense created by the reactionary right as a means to attack its perceived enemies on the left. However, there is of course a phenomenon which we can call political correctness. This phenomenon involves the avoidance of language deemed to be offensive, insensitive, insulting, marginalizing, or dangerous in some other way. This process results in a sanitization of the written or spoken word. It's been well observed that this does indeed take place in left-wing circles and in academia, but the right has its own form of PC culture, sometimes referred to as conservative or patriotic correctness. Unfortunately, many people, having been influenced by a media machine dedicated to disseminating false information to the public, have a poor or warped understanding of what political correctness actually is. In the mainstream culture, the term political correctness is often used as a weapon to attack progressives. Oftentimes, the idea of PC itself can be rallied against by those who want to justify their bigotry. There is obviously a clear danger where we exile words and strip language of some of its more colourful aspects, but it's probably true of most people that they do tailor the way they speak depending on the company they are in or who they are addressing. The truth is, everyone will be offended by something. We all have our hang-ups and biases. Occasionally, we all say things that we later might regret. Situational awareness is a good skill to develop as you negotiate your way through the social jungle. How do we push back against an environment where excessive word policing is going on? You have to be true to your beliefs and values and do according to your conscience. One should not go out of one's way to be deliberately offensive as a hobby or for sport, though there can be just cause to upset people sometimes for their own good. If you are being attacked by those who seek to limit your speech for their own less than virtuous purposes, you should speak out against this, for your own sake and for the good of the community. Solitude can be healthy. Choosing small periods of isolation can be an effective way of managing the self in difficult times. Having said this, it's clear that many suffer from loneliness. For many, isolation can be involuntary and painful. Social attitudes towards the character of the loner shift in time and place and can be revealing. in times past, certain individuals who chose to walk alone or walk with God might have been afforded a good deal of respect. Perhaps in more recent times, negative views of so-called perfect or absolute solitude permeate cultures around the world. For some, it might be seen as unnatural. This is nonsense. There is a touch of the herd mentality where the fear of the perceived loner is concerned. We would all do well not to rush to judgment or allow fear to corrupt our reasoning faculties, but sadly we all fall short of better standards on occasion. The process of industrialization and urbanization has caused community breakdowns in the past couple of centuries as the old order gave way to a more competitive and fast-paced existence. This has been traumatic and disastrous for many working people. Feelings of isolation and alienation have been commonplace. However, the ever-modernizing world of ours doesn't necessarily lead to folks feeling isolated or lonely. Every individual person is unique, and as such deals with problems in their own unique fashion. This must be balanced with another important truth. We are group animals, and we need each other for a vast number of reasons. As a society, we should recognize that loneliness is a real social problem which has to be addressed by governments, civil society, healthcare workers, the general public, and private citizens. We should also recognize that ill-conceived or poorly thought-out strategies for dealing with the problem of loneliness can end up doing irreparable damage to the most vulnerable among us. Human complexities and cultural nuances have to be accounted for when formulating plans and policies. The future is to some a truly exciting unknown, to others a terrifying possibility. Perhaps most people haven't yet grasped the potential benefits or dangers of increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence. Technology advances at ever-increasing rates. This will be a big game changer. Are we at the gates of a wondrous new world? Visions of utopia will never be realized, of course, but it's not difficult to understand the excitement. These are amazing times. What if humans, in the not-so-distant future, are able to modify themselves beyond current limitations? Could we be faced with a new species of human sooner than we might think? The subject of genetic engineering understandably makes many uncomfortable. No doubt many people in power and their followers will rally against a new order of improved humans. Many will be far more welcoming. If we assume that an improved human order, with defects scrubbed and intelligence greatly increased, is a possibility, and it's fair to assume this, then we can fairly assume that this will cause a host of social and political problems in the short and medium term. We can't accurately predict the long-term effects, but the future will not likely be a nightmarish dystopia. It will be an elaboration of the present. We affirm that a democratic and transparent world order is essential moving forward in an ever-increasingly complex society. We should proceed with care and caution, always bearing in mind our common humanity. Is there really such a thing as a useless class of people? Does this not beg the question, useless to whom? Useless to a social master class, perhaps? Useless to the rich? A very dangerous idea is the concept of the useless masses. With the wrong kind of people in power, this concept has been put into practice with devastating consequences. Perhaps many people in the future will find themselves out of work due to technological advances. Today, many are unable to work because of a disability. In truth, a person does not have to be defined by their job or lack of one. One's identity does not have to be bound up with an occupation or a career. Identity hang-ups of one kind or another can often lead to self-limiting behavior. A self-evaluation from time to time can be an edifying exercise. We affirm that there is no such thing as a useless person. Every human being has worth. It's easy enough to define sanity in basic terms, being reasonable and showing sound judgment. On one's own, one cannot know if one is sane or insane, right? Do we not need a second opinion, and perhaps a third? You could give a little political speech to a small audience, and half the room might think you are a rational person with a firm grip on reality. The other half might see you as crazy or unhinged, and as such a danger to yourself and others. If the world is a crazy place, as is often remarked, then isn't it so-called normal people who are actually mad? Legally speaking, it isn't possible to prove sanity. Legal insanity is not the same as medically diagnosed mental illnesses. It is well to remember this. Taking into consideration the complexities of the human brain, and taking into account the sometimes chaotic and confusing nature of human societies, things are not so clear-cut where discussions of sanity are concerned. There is a cultural concept of sanity, which is not the legal concept of sanity. The legal concept is not the medical concept. None of these concepts will necessarily match up with a wider philosophical conception of what is and isn't sane. Is acting sane the same as being sane? Can large swaths of the population be insane without even knowing it? Does the behavior of people in the West appear insane to those living in poorer parts of the earth, and vice versa? One might ask the question, is war insane? Is it insane to slaughter innocent people to settle a political or religious dispute? We say that war is an act of collective insanity. The slaughter of innocents can fairly be called moral insanity. Arrogance is believing that your point of view is the only valid point of view. This kind of attitude blocks constructive conversation. A narrow or myopic worldview can also block personal or intellectual growth. A man who throws up a wall around his mind isn't acting in his best interests. Arrogance is self-defeating. If you never take other people's views into consideration, if you regard all other viewpoints as worthless, then you are, in a sense, blind. If you believe you have nothing left to learn, you are wrong. One must learn to take criticism on board in order to grow and develop one's character. Moral improvement requires that the mind can never be locked up in absolute certainty. Improvement of the self requires adaptability and flexibility. Arrogance tends to spring from insecurity. The fear of being hurt or humiliated plays its part in the formation and continuation of an arrogant attitude. One should not run away from confrontation. Dealing with confrontation is a skill which requires practice. Perhaps it is the case that a fear of intimacy can play a role in people avoiding confrontational situations. But with a mature relationship of one kind or another comes conflict and friction. Sometimes one is compelled by conscience to stand one's ground and argue the point. This should be done in a calm and composed fashion. It is important to be assertive without being aggressive. It is true to say that confrontation can be damaging or stressful, but it can also be genuinely beneficial. It can strengthen relationships and help people to increase their confidence and social management skills. And it can also help to shed light on greater truths. Confrontation is inevitable in life. A person would do well to treat it as an opportunity to learn something new. Being a good speaker alone doesn't make a person a good communicator. Being a good listener is equally important. We have to develop decent listening skills so that we may learn at a higher level. In order to become a good listener, one must have a true and enthusiastic interest in the lives of other people. Merely reacting to what is said to you doesn't constitute good listening. When listening to another person, an open and empathetic mind do you credit. One would further do well to concentrate and receive the message as it is intended. Perceiving intention requires both patience and practice. The ability to really listen and hear what another is trying to say seems to be quite a rare quality. We live in a fast-paced modern environment where our attention can be distracted, but it isn't such an old-fashioned idea that we should show respect to the speaker by offering an undivided attention. When you listen to someone, you are not just focusing on the details. When at your best, calling on your natural resources, you will be reading another person's fears, concerns, and maybe their aspirations. Reading subtle signs and body language is part of the art of listening. Being good listeners requires that we all become lifelong students of humanity. What should we do with the criminal? If we believe in the rule of law and hold that there is such a thing as justice, then we have to defend our principles. It is not wrong to punish a wrongdoer, but we should not be eager to punish, and we must understand that revenge is not justice. Certain essential questions we would do well to consider when tackling the problem of crime. Is it our desire to protect the community and the individual from being violated? Answer yes. Then we have to act to incapacitate lawbreakers. Do we wish to deter criminal activity? If we do, then we should seek to set examples where we are able. In looking to set a good example, we should never be cruel or heavy-handed or brutal. Our actions should be proportional to the offence committed, and we should value the art or craft of rehabilitation. Individuals have to be held to account for their actions. Having said this, we cannot ignore that those who come from a more deprived background are more likely to fall into trouble with the law. Sad truth is that poverty and crime have an intimate relationship. A truly civilized society cannot tolerate the existence of poverty. A collective desire to end the cycles of injustice and hardship in the world could create an irresistible force. This force can drive us to higher ground. One can see that to hold the truth in high regard is an admirable quality. Lies and deception can and do tear at the social fabric. In public and private life, we need to be able to trust each other. Society would soon break down if no one honoured their agreements. A person's word is a form of social currency. If he is deceptive, lazy, or unreliable, then his estimation in the eyes of his peers will go down. To be generally truthful and honourable creates greater trust and strengthens social bonds across communities, cultures, countries, and continents. But if we accept that there is no absolute morality, then we must further accept that there are exceptions to generally held rules and standards. Is it always wrong to lie? We say that it is not. In certain circumstances, for example when resisting a tyrannical government, it can be considered virtuous to deliberately mislead the authorities where the goal is to protect innocent life. Is it always wrong to break an agreement? It is not. Sometimes we may commit to things having been misled ourselves. In such cases, we should have the right to reverse course. An absolute moral standard does not allow for a person to truly develop and follow reason and logic as they should, and so it is a corrupting influence. Your conscience has to operate freely. Should we always be looking for something or somebody to condemn? Should we be severe in our judgments? Should we ask ourselves regular questions along the lines of, am I being picky? Am I being cruel? Am I being unfair? When we think of a judgmental person, what comes to mind? Is it perhaps a person who is petty and mean? Is it a person who makes sweeping pronouncements about others in the absence of reliable information? We all make judgments about the world and about each other. Some judgments are reached after lengthy consideration and a weighing up of the evidence. Some judgments are not necessarily based on solid ground. How many of us can honestly say we have never judged another poorly or harshly before? We're all capable of being poor judges. We should all be in the habit of regularly questioning our own beliefs and assumptions. Let it be understood here that we refer to what is defined as judgmental in the pejorative sense. To be judgmental, then, is to be a person who habitually forms judgments which are characterized by a lack of tolerance, compassion, or objectivity. Being critical of others doesn't necessarily make one judgmental. Being unpleasant or unfriendly with your aimed criticisms doesn't by definition make you a judgmental individual. Sometimes an unfriendly approach is the correct approach, although one should not go out of one's way to insult people. Being generally insolent is not good behaviour. It should be said that criticism isn't exclusively about focusing on the negative aspect of a thing or person. Positive criticism is essential to improvement. What should our method be when we make judgments? Should we not be deliberate, analytical, and dispassionate? Should we try to avoid jumping to conclusions? We owe it to ourselves and each other to be fair in our dealings. It can be easy to think you have no control over your life, or no control over the negative forces or influences to which you are subject. Self-pity can creep in if you allow yourself to believe you cannot escape from unfavourable circumstances. Self-pity has been described by some as a feeling which can be as destructive as narcotic addiction. Self-pity can give a person feelings of pleasure for sure, but it has the effect of cutting a person off from the truth. People can clearly get stuck in a cycle of feeling sorry for themselves. This will drag both individuals and groups down. How can a person escape from a victim mentality? In the role of victim, an individual might be getting plenty of attention and validation, achieving pleasure from the self-pity, but such an individual has to ask the question at some point: what good comes from playing the victim and carrying on as if one is completely powerless to change things? Good things do not come from shunning responsibility. Playing the blame game while refusing to recognize oneself as a player in the game is not a healthy way to carry on. Perhaps many self-esteem issues arise from people failing or refusing to take responsibility for their actions or some of the things that happen to them. There are benefits to training into oneself a more positive outlook. Men and women who say, "I am the captain of my ship," and are aware of the pitfalls of the victim mentality, give themselves a clear advantage. As many people know, it is a huge confidence booster when you take positive steps with a can-do attitude. A wider and brighter worldview is surely preferable to a narrow and defeatist outlook. At one time or another, we have all been treated badly. Maybe you have felt the sting of humiliation more than a few times. Maybe this has generated resentment. This is to be expected. Those who deal with this in the right way, by being positive, taking responsibility and moving forward, allow themselves to grow. Those who allow the resentment to fester and gain strength can and do spiral into the victim mentality. Resentment can be very strong, but forgiveness can weaken and destroy it. Forgiveness can liberate a man from his chains. We do not want to live in a society of people trapped by their own victimhood. We can all be victims, of course. It's how we deal with events and negative experiences which is of great significance. Looking at the long track record of human beings, would you say we were a species that held sentient life in high regard? Is it not true that we kill other animals for sport? Have we not, by our collective actions, driven many species into extinction and drove a great many others to the very brink? Humans are the cause of much unnecessary suffering on this planet. Humans needlessly slaughter. We torture our fellow animals, and we needlessly hold many creatures in captivity. Much of what is sometimes referred to as intensive animal farming or factory farming is simply cruel and disgusting. At the very least, if we regard ourselves as an enlightened people, we should be seeking to protect animals from unnecessary suffering. We clearly have great intelligence. Clearly we have the ability to be kind and compassionate. We can relieve so much of the pain and horror in this world with an effort of the will and a sea change in attitude. There is no strict divide between ourselves and other animals. Non-human animals are capable of love, joy, sadness, anger, and other emotional states. They can be our dear friends and companions. They deserve better than this world we have created. We affirm that humans, because of our unique intelligence, have a unique responsibility to massively reduce the total amount of misery on this planet. The rampant brutality has to be stopped. Is it always wrong for people to exploit non-human animals? There are no moral absolutes in the world. When people do exploit other creatures, which of course we will continue to do, the welfare of these creatures has to be protected. Legal, strategic, and technological means can be forwarded to secure genuine protective measures. Although it can't be said that consuming flesh is wrong in the absolute sense, it can be said that the planet could benefit from people consuming far less meat. The same point can be made of other animal products. It would benefit populations generally to be made more aware that their consumer habits may well be helping to perpetuate cycles of ruthless exploitation and cruelty. What can we say about scientific experiments on non-human animals over the years and decades? A lot of the knowledge we have today has been acquired unethically. Wide recognition of this would be a big step forward. Science and technology has moved faster than research protocols. We now know that chemical properties of most substances, and we have powerful computers which allow us to predict the outcomes of chemical interactions. We can experiment on live tissue samples, non-human animals not required, and we can use human leftovers from operations. Is there really an excuse for experimenting on animals the way we do anymore? Many millions of animals are killed every year at the conclusion of experiments. This is completely unacceptable. We cannot look at other creatures and see mere objects. We have to see our fellow sentient beings.